My name's Nora Thompson, and tonight, like most nights since arriving in Monte Carlo, I found myself sitting alone at a small cafe on the edge of the bustling casino square. It's a far cry from the luxurious life I grew up with, but after graduating from an elite college stateside, all I craved was a break from it all. My dad practically owns half the globe, hotels, tech firms, you name it. But I go by my mom's last name to keep things low-key to dodge the vultures who circle anyone tied to my family. The evening breeze was starting to cool when he walked in. Daniel. He strolled into the cafe like he owned the place, or at least like he believed he did. Confidence rolled off him in waves, the kind that probably comes with wearing a suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Without asking, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, a cocky grin on his face. "Mind if I join you?" he finally asked, after already sitting. "Looks like you already did," I replied, barely glancing up from my coffee. He chuckled, smooth as silk. "I'm Daniel. And you are?" "Nora." I gave him a quick once-over. Not my usual type, too polished, too self-assured, but I had to admit, good-looking. "So, Nora, what's a girl like you doing at a place like this all by herself?" His tone was playful, somewhere between teasing and curious. "Just enjoying my coffee," I answered, keeping my reply deliberately vague. "What's your excuse?" I could say business, but that'd be a lie. Let's just say I'm scouting for something interesting, and it looks like I found it. His gaze held steady, and I couldn't tell if I was amused or annoyed by his persistence. I raised an eyebrow. "Well, I hope the coffee meets your expectations." Daniel grinned. "Something tells me it already has." I wasn't here to make friends or find a fling. I leaned back, ready to shut this down. "If you're running some kind of game, you're wasting your time. I don't fall for lines." His voice lowered slightly, a flicker of intrigue in his expression. "Who says I'm playing a game?" "Experience," I shot back. "You sit down uninvited, drop a line, and expect—" "What? A phone number? A date?" He leaned back, clearly entertained. "Tough. I like that, but no, I'm not fishing for a number. Just conversation. If it's too much, say the word, and I'll disappear." I studied him for a moment. Monte Carlo was stunning, but also lonely. A little conversation wouldn't hurt. "Fine," I said. "We can talk, but keep it light." To my surprise, the conversation flowed easily. He didn't pry, and I didn't feel the need to share anything personal. As the night deepened, I realized I was enjoying his company more than I expected. Daniel wasn't like the guys who tried to dazzle me with their wallets or family connections. He had the air of someone familiar with luxury but not defined by it. Eventually, it was time to leave. I stood, brushing off the cool night air. "Well, Daniel, this was unexpectedly pleasant." He gave me a slow grin. "Surprised yourself, huh?" "Maybe just a little. Good night, Daniel." As I walked back to my apartment, his words echoed in my mind. Monte Carlo was full of surprises, and perhaps tonight I had stumbled upon one. After that first encounter, my nights in Monte Carlo felt a little less solitary. Daniel had a knack for showing up wherever I was. Whether I was wandering the markets during the day or having a quiet dinner on my own, he'd always find me. Surprisingly, I didn't mind. He wasn't overbearing, just there. Persistent but never pushy, as if being around me was where he genuinely wanted to be. One evening, as I sat on a terrace watching the sun slip below the horizon, Daniel appeared once again, 2 coffees in hand. Without a word, he took a seat beside me, passing one of the cups over. I glanced at him, amused, assuming I wanted coffee. He gave me a lazy grin. I figured it was a safe bet. And somehow, it was. I teased, raising an eyebrow as he handed me a cup. "If I'm wrong, I'll drink both," he said with a grin. "Good guess, then," I replied, accepting the coffee. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of waves filling the gaps between us. It felt strangely natural, as if words weren't necessary. "You never told me what you do back in the States." Daniel finally broke the quiet, his voice low and easy. I shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered. I work. Right now, I'm just enjoying not working." "Fair enough." He chuckled, his smile soft in the fading light. "But everyone's got a story, don't you think?" Over the next few days, we slipped into a comfortable rhythm. Daniel took me to parts of Monte Carlo I hadn't explored, hidden gardens, quaint little shops, and quiet beaches that tourists rarely found. We talked about everything and nothing: movies, books, favorite foods. He had a ridiculous passion for defending Daniel Craig as the best James Bond, while I was all about Sean Connery and the classics. One afternoon, as we walked along the beach, Daniel suddenly stopped and turned to me. There was a seriousness in his gaze I hadn't seen before. Nora, I know I'm just some guy you met at a cafe, but these past few weeks, I don't know. It's been different. Better, because of you. I stopped too, caught off guard. Feelings were the last thing I planned on dealing with here. Daniel, I like hanging out with you, I really do. But this is just a break for me. I'm not looking for complications. He nodded slowly, taking a breath. I get it. No pressure. Just know that I'm here. And I think you're pretty amazing. Days blurred into weeks, and before I knew it, my time in Monte Carlo was running out. Daniel and I started spending more time together, and what began as casual conversations evolved into late-night dinners and early morning breakfasts. It was the last thing I expected, falling for someone under the Mediterranean stars. Then, one evening, Daniel dropped a bombshell. Come back with me, Nora. Work at my company in the States. I know it sounds sudden, but I think this could be great. The idea was crazy, completely insane, really, and yet part of me was tempted. Not just by the job, but by the adventure, by the thought of seeing where this unexpected connection might lead. Moving back to the States felt like stepping into a parallel universe, where Daniel's offer wasn't just a job, it was an invitation into his life. And suddenly, the line between a simple break and something much bigger began to blur. I was living in an ordinary apartment in an ordinary part of town, trying to blend in, playing the role of an ordinary girl who had just happened to luck out. But my father, he had different ideas about ordinary. He showed up one afternoon, completely unannounced, just as I was unpacking the last of my boxes. His booming laughter filled my small living room, the sound making the space seem even smaller. He stood in the doorway, larger than life, his presence impossible to ignore. Nora, hiding out in plain sight, huh? He chuckled, pulling me into a hug that almost knocked the air out of me. His grip was strong, just like his personality. So, tell me about this decision, he said, giving me that knowing look, his voice light but probing. This guy must be something special for you to up and move like this. I sighed, sitting down on the couch, trying to brace myself for the inevitable fatherly interrogation. His name's Daniel. He's different, Dad. He doesn't know about all this, I said, gesturing vaguely around, meaning the wealth, the name, the complications that came with being my father's daughter. Dad sat down next to me, his face now serious. Nora, you know you can't keep that a secret forever. If he's going to be part of your life, he should know who you really are. I know, Dad. I want to be sure about him before I complicate things. He ruffled my hair just like he used to when I was a kid, a small smile breaking through his usual sternness. Always looking out for you, kiddo. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm just a call away. And you know, I've got eyes everywhere. He winked, but there was an edge to his words that only a father with this kind of power could deliver. The next few weeks were a whirlwind, adjusting to my new job, my new life. Daniel was a constant, as supportive and charming as ever. But there was something different about him now, an edge that came with his own responsibilities. One night, over a quiet dinner at my place, Daniel brought up the conversation I had been dreading. Nora, he began, his tone soft but insistent, when do you think I'll get to meet your parents? I feel like I'm missing a big part of your life. I froze, the weight of the moment settling over me. Well, my mom passed away a long time ago, and my dad, he's just a regular trucker. We're not exactly on speaking terms right now. Daniel frowned, a look of genuine concern crossing his face. I'm really sorry to hear that, Nora. But you know, whenever you're ready, I'd love to meet him. Family's important. I nodded, appreciating his words but knowing the truth. My family was a world I wasn't ready to expose Daniel to. Not yet. Life with Daniel moved fast. We were already blending our lives in ways I hadn't expected. My job at his company was going great, and our relationship deepened with every passing day. It felt like we were heading towards something big, but when that big moment actually came, I was still caught off guard. It was a normal evening at his place, his upscale apartment with stunning views of the city skyline. We had just finished a casual dinner, nothing fancy, just takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. We were on the couch, a documentary about ocean life playing in the background, the kind of thing you watch but don't really watch. Then Daniel turned to me. his expression far more serious than the situation called for. He took my hand and suddenly, my heart started racing as Daniel spoke. Nora, I've been thinking about us, about everything we've been through and everything I want for us in the future. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Yeah. He looked at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I love you, Nora. I love everything about you, and I can't imagine my life without you. He paused, swallowing hard, clearly nervous. That made two of us. I want to be with you always. Will you marry me? No grand gesture, no dramatic kneeling or a ring box reveal. Just Daniel, direct, honest, and so very him. It was simple, genuine, and all I ever needed. Yes, I said, the word tumbling out in a rush, almost a relief. Yes, I will. His face lit up with that wide, infectious grin, the same one that had won me over from the start. He pulled me into a tight hug, and for the rest of the evening, we sat there talking about our future, our dreams, and the life we wanted to build together. It was exciting, maybe a bit daunting, but it felt right. It felt like us. The next challenge came when I told my dad. I expected him to be thrilled, but his response was lukewarm at best. Nora, you know I want nothing but your happiness, but are you sure about this? It's all happening so fast, he said, his voice heavy with concern. I'm sure, Dad. He's a great guy, you'll see. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. All right, but promise me you'll sign a prenup, just to be safe. The word didn't scare me. It was just another part of the modern marriage package, especially when you had as much at stake as I did, even if Daniel didn't know the full extent of it. Of course, Dad. We'll handle it. Good, he said, nodding. And Nora, I won't be at the wedding. I don't want to spoil your story about being a simple girl. I knew he was protecting my privacy, but the thought of him not being there stung. Still, I understood. Then came the introduction to Daniel's mother, and it was far from warm. Her icy reception was palpable from the moment I stepped into their family home. Throughout dinner, she scrutinized me with a look that could freeze the room. Daniel, are you sure about this girl? She doesn't seem like a fit for our family, she said bluntly, her tone as cold as her gaze. Daniel tried to smooth things over, but his mother was relentless. A prenuptial agreement is non-negotiable, she insisted. I agreed without hesitation, knowing it would ease some tension. Absolutely, I wouldn't have it any other way, I said as we later formalized the terms with a lawyer present. Despite these hurdles, our wedding in the Maldives was breathtaking. Standing beside Daniel with the ocean whispering behind us and the sand beneath our feet, I felt a surge of hope. It was just us. Our love and a future we were ready to shape together. The rocky start with family expectations was behind us, and married life began even better than I could have imagined. We settled into our new home, a beautiful place with more space than we could ever need. It was supposed to be the start of our perfect life together. I threw myself back into work, determined to prove that I was more than just the boss's wife. My role at the company had always been challenging, but now there was an added layer of expectations, and I was ready to face them. I was not only managing projects but also playing a key role in decision-making processes. At first, Daniel seemed proud. In meetings, he'd introduce me with a hint of pride in his voice. This is Nora, my wife and our project lead. But as the months went by and the projects under my leadership started generating significant profits and boosting the company's profile, something shifted in Daniel. It was subtle at first. A comment here, a slight remark there. One evening over dinner, he finally brought it up. You're doing great at work. Too great, maybe. I looked up from my plate, confused. What do you mean, too great? Isn't that good for the company? He sighed, pushing his food around with his fork. It is, but, the guys are starting to say it's becoming the Nora show over there. His words stung. I tried to keep my voice steady. Isn't that a bit unfair? I thought you'd be happy we're doing well. I am happy, he said, though his voice was tinged with frustration. It's a lot. Everyone's always talking about you, about how you handle things. Makes me wonder where I stand. That conversation was the first of many. The more the business grew, the more strain it seemed to put on our relationship. Daniel's initial support started to feel like thinly veiled resentment. I couldn't understand it. He was the one who had encouraged me to step up in the first place. So why now, when I was succeeding, did it feel like everything was falling apart? Things took a turn for the worse when his mother came to stay with us for a few weeks. She brought with her a set of old-world, traditional expectations that I had always tried to avoid. "You're always at the office, Nora. When do you have time to take care of your husband?" she would say in passing, her voice thick with judgment. I did my best to shrug off her remarks, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But every comment she made seemed to widen the growing rift between Daniel and me. No matter how much success I found at work, it seemed it only deepened the cracks in our marriage. The breaking point came one evening when Daniel walked through the door, his expression grim. "Nora," he said, his voice heavy, "I think it's best if you leave the company. We need to focus on our family, and it feels like your role there is causing too much tension." I stared at him, disbelief and anger rising in my chest. "Leave the company? Why? I've been contributing so much." "It's for the best," he said flatly. "You can focus on the house. Maybe start that garden you've always talked about." His tone was dismissive, as if he were making an insignificant decision, not dismantling my career. The next day, I came home to an empty house. All the staff, housekeepers, cooks, and gardeners, were gone. "I let them go," Daniel said, not even looking up from his phone. "You want to be more involved at home, right? Here's your chance." His voice was cold, almost cruel, and in that moment, I realized the life we built together was no longer what it seemed. I wasn't afraid of housework, but the way this responsibility was thrust upon me felt wrong. This wasn't the caring, supportive man I had married. This was someone intolerant and controlling. With his mother staying with us, the situation became even more unbearable. She would smirk whenever Daniel discussed my new role as a full-time housewife, often saying, "It's good for a wife to focus on her home." As I adjusted to this unexpected twist in my life, shame crept in, shame that I hadn't seen this coming, and shame that I had to admit my father might have been right about Daniel. When Daniel suggested a trip to Monte Carlo to reignite the spark in our marriage, I felt a glimmer of hope, but that hope evaporated quickly when his mother announced she would join us. "It's been ages since I've traveled," she declared, her tone leaving no room for disagreement. Daniel welcomed her with open arms, completely disregarding my feelings. We rented a charming but costly little house in Monte Carlo, which quickly felt more like a prison than a getaway. Daniel and his mother treated the city as their personal playground, renting luxurious cars, shopping at exclusive boutiques, and dining at the finest restaurants while I was left to manage the household. They expected home-cooked meals, reducing me to little more than a servant in what was supposed to be a holiday retreat. As the days wore on, Daniel's mother's comments grew sharper, her disdain evident. "Nora, living at someone else's expense must be quite the life, huh?" she sneered, her words a thinly veiled insult. Daniel just laughed, his laughter cutting deeper than any wound. I felt utterly isolated, the beauty of the city overshadowed by their contempt. One evening, as we passed a grand old-style hotel, his mother expressed her envy. "Lucky billionaire Harris. Imagine ruling over a palace like that." At a restaurant that overlooked the sea, my patience finally shattered. When she waved the waiter over with an imperious flick of her wrist and ordered for me, "The cheapest dish will do. No need to spoil her with extravagances she doesn't deserve." I felt humiliation wash over me like the waves crashing on the rocks below. Rising from my chair, I faced them both, my voice steady and louder than I intended. "I will not tolerate this any longer. I'm divorcing you, Daniel." The cold air of Monte Carlo felt warm compared to the chill of betrayal. Instead of rushing to apologize, they followed me out, hurling insults. "Look at her, a beggar unworthy of my son," my mother-in-law called after me. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, but Daniel caught up and yanked my purse from my shoulder, his fingers clenching it tightly. "This is my money, Nora. Go on, get out on all fours if you have to," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. I stood there, stunned and alone, while his mother laughed cruelly. "Maybe now you'll learn to beg in Monte Carlo since that's all you're good for." As their laughter echoed down the street, fate intervened. We were near that grand hotel, the one Daniel's mother had envied. She sneered, "Maybe they'll let you in as a beggar." Just then, the gates swung open, and a guard approached, recognition lighting up his face. "Miss Harris," he called warmly, walking over with a respectful salute. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Daniel and his mother fell silent, confusion replacing their smug satisfaction. "Your father told us you might come by. Please, this way. The best room is always reserved for you." As the guard led me inside, I could see my mother-in-law's bravado crumble to ash. Ignoring them both, I straightened my posture and thanked the guard. Behind me, Daniel's pleas began again. "Nora, please. I didn't mean it. His mother shouted. Perhaps we could come in for a drink at least. I didn't look back. The doors of the hotel closed behind me, a symbolic barrier shutting out the chaos of my old life. Inside, the staff greeted me with the respect due to the daughter of their employer. The flight back to the United States was long, offering plenty of time to contemplate my next steps. By the time I landed, my resolve had hardened, unyielding as the city sidewalks I had walked. The next day, I found myself in the office of a reputable lawyer, papers spread out before me like a battle map. During your tenure at the company, your husband failed to pay you bonuses owed for the multi-million-dollar deals you close. The lawyer pointed out, his tone a mix of surprise and indignation. We're suing for $3 million. The courtroom felt cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the heated glares Daniel shot across the room as he fumbled through his defense. The man I once loved looked utterly pathetic. When the verdict came, a resounding victory awarding me $3 million, Daniel's face crumpled in disbelief. Outside the courthouse, he made one last plea. Nora, everyone's laughing at me. I messed up. Can we start over? His words once tugged at my heartstrings, but that time had passed. You only missed the money, Daniel. Maybe listen less to your mother next time, I replied, the edge in my voice cutting through the crisp air as I turned and walked away. Returning home, I faced my father. The air between us was thick with unspoken words until I broke the silence. Dad, I should have listened to you. He wrapped me in a warm, forgiving embrace. You had to learn on your own. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. We talked late into the night about life, mistakes, and new beginnings. His advice became a guiding light as I navigated my future. Inspired by our conversation, I began laying the groundwork for my next venture. My experience at Daniel's company had honed my skills and ignited a passion I couldn't deny. I decided to open my own investment firm. With my expertise and the hefty settlement I had received, I had the resources to create something meaningful, something that was entirely mine. Weeks turned into months as I built my business from the ground up. The challenges were daunting, but every setback taught me a lesson, and every success confirmed that I was on the right path. Sitting in my new office overlooking the bustling streets below, I realized how far I had come, from a disillusioned wife in a loveless marriage to a competent business owner. The journey had been fraught with hurdles, but each one had made me stronger.